Canadians will head to the ballot box today to elect our country's next prime minister. And after 5 weeks of campaigning, we will find out later tonight who will serve in the next government and opposition. So what did we learn on the campaign trail? Here with us this morning, our strategists, Chris Day and Laura D'Angelo. Thank you so much for being with us on what is a very busy day for folks like yourselves.
Indeed.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. Laura, let's start with you. What was one of your highs?
I think one of my big highs was Mark Carney's overall tone about Donald Trump and the tariffs, specifically on April 2nd after Liberation Day, as they like to call it. Mark Carney came out and he actually said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the global economy as we know it has changed.
Okay.
And the way he talked about tariffs and the changes, I think for Canadians was refreshing. It wasn't only hyperbole. He used clear language. He was able to explain what happened without talking down to Canadians, but in a way that made it very clear the potential impact. And I think that's quite new in an election. I think we're used to a lot of really big language that's repeated over and over and over again. Whereas he didn't do that, right?
So refreshing rhetoric, in your opinion.
It was such a refreshing rhetoric and just a really nice way to talk about policy to Canadians, not to assume Canadians only want the headline.
Okay, do we have that moment? Okay, all right, let's go over to you, Chris, and talk about your high.
So I found something similar, that we were able to resist going to a really negative and very personal campaign, and managed to keep this as a campaign about ideas and a campaign about big ideas. After the Trump threat, after 10 years of economic stagnation and hard times for a lot of people, there are some very real and tough conversations that need to happen after this election. And I think this has been a battle of big ideas to shape those conversations and really determine how those next few months, next few years are going to affect all of us.
All right, let's remind our viewers of some of those moments that you're speaking of. Let's see what we have here.
And are you prepared to elect the same Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal staffers all over again for a fourth term? Mr. Carney, Justin Trudeau's staffers are actually here with you at this debate in Montreal, writing the talking points that you are regurgitating into the microphone.
That's Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre talking about Carney's ability to regurgitate what staffers have written from him, for him, I should say. Laura, do you think the debates made a difference in terms of how people felt going into this election?
That's such a good question. Debates generally reaffirm your own beliefs about the leader you probably already support. And I think that happened this time. I do think a couple of really interesting things happened. I think we saw a couple of really human moments from Pierre Poilievre, which we're not actually used to seeing in his 20-year career, right? We're used to seeing him as a lot more aggressive, but we saw a couple of really human moments that I think was great. The other thing I think we saw from Mark Carney, which was really interesting, is it was a very different debate style than we were used to. He didn't really get into it with anyone. He addressed every point from the other leaders as they came up and then tried to talk some more. And that's a really different style on stage, really shows some of his management style, almost a chair of the board type of posture. And I think that those things gave Canadians a different picture of both of the two frontrunners.
How about yourself, Chris?
I thought the debates were really informative in that I think Pierre presented a very positive vision for the country. He presented some very clear ideas and some practical policies that will help individual Canadians, individual families get out of the tough times that they've been feeling for the last few years. And I thought that he was able to fend off the really aggressive interruptions of Jagmeet Singh, to also score, make the points that he wanted to make with Mark Carney, including the one that we just saw, which is, frankly, people need to ask themselves when they go to the polls today, have the last 10 years been good for you? And are the people around Mark Carney, who are, by the way, the same ones that were around Justin Trudeau for most of that time, are they the ones that are going to get us out of the situations that they, in fact, have created? And so that's why I thought that point in the debate was a particularly strong one.
Well, speaking of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, I think a lot of people have viewed this election as a two-horse race, more so than previous ones. We typically know who ends up coming out on top, either Liberal or Conservative. But what has this shown us about our country and where we stand with some of the other parties, in your opinion, Laura?
So Jagmeet Singh really took himself out of this race quite early, whether that happened in the fall because he didn't want to topple the Liberal government, which he could have, or that he kind of removed himself from the Donald Trump narrative. He never really put forward a message that resonated with Canadians. And I think for Canadians, that means that he couldn't play.
Okay.
Frankly. And because it is the number one question right now, despite what everyone wants the ballot question to be, the ballot question is, how will Canada stand up to Donald Trump? And how will our economy change and survive and diversify? And both frontrunners have put forward a very clear vision for that. Mark Carney has a lot of bona fides for how he can get us through that crisis. And Jagmeet Singh never really managed to break through on that. And I think what that means is that Canadians now do see this as a two-party race.
Okay.
And that is something that could change our political landscape for a very long time.
Right. Chris, are you of a similar mindset? Do you think Canadians are maybe looking at Jagmeet Singh and saying, you propped up the Liberal government that we weren't a fan of, and they can see change in Mark Carney with a new face for the Liberal Party, and obviously change with Pierre Poilievre because they hadn't been in power?
Absolutely. The collapse of the NDP in this campaign is, I think, one of the main storylines and probably one of the main contributors to the results that we'll see tonight in ridings across the country. NDP voters have had to say to themselves, can I go to Mark Carney, or is Pierre Poilievre speaking my language in a way that the NDP used to, and that Jagmeet Singh should potentially be. And so that will be a really interesting thing to see how what are sometimes 2 or 3 party races shake out into 2-party races in ridings across the country where the Liberals and the Conservatives have different histories, and the NDP is traditionally strong, but isn't this time.
Right. I want to thank you both for being with us. I'm not going to ask you any outcome predictions on Election Day.
My crystal ball's broken.
But definitely be sure to stay with CTV News tonight for results, analysis, and perspective from right across the country. Our election night coverage gets underway at 7 p.m. our time. It will be led by CTV's chief national news anchor, Omar Sachedina, and CTV News' chief political correspondent, Vashi Kapelos.